Have you ever felt like you're carrying a weight that isn't yours to bear? You wake up, and instead of feeling supported and energized by the people in your life, you feel drained, heavy, and perhaps a little bit lost. We are taught from a young age that loyalty is a virtue, and that we should hold on to our connections at all costs. But what if holding on is actually the very thing preventing you from becoming who you were meant to be? What if the peace you are searching for is on the other side of a door you are too afraid to close? In the philosophy of Stoicism, there is a concept called radical freedom. It is the profound realization that your inner peace and your character are your most sacred possessions, and anything that threatens them must be evaluated with absolute clarity. Not every connection is meant to last forever. Some relationships serve as sails, helping us navigate toward our potential, while others act as anchors, keeping us stuck in storms that aren't even ours to fight. In today's episode, we are exploring 12 clear, undeniable signs that it might be time to let go. We aren't talking about giving up when things get difficult. We're talking about recognizing when a relationship has become a threat to your soul, your values, and your mental tranquility. These lessons are grounded in the timeless wisdom of the Stoics, tools designed to help you stop reacting out of guilt or fear and start choosing a life of dignity. If you've been feeling a sense of unease, or if you've wondered if the cost of staying is becoming too high, this journey is for you. By the end of this episode, you will have the clarity to distinguish between a challenge to be overcome and a toxic cycle that needs to be broken. It is time to reclaim your agency and protect your inner sanctuary. Your path to radical freedom begins now. 1. Hindering personal growth. Think of a relationship as a partnership in a long, meaningful journey. Ideally, the person by your side should be like a sail, catching the wind and helping you move toward your greatest potential. But what happens when that connection starts to act as an anchor instead? One of the most significant signs that a relationship should end is when it begins to hinder your personal growth. Stoicism teaches us that our primary duty is to live in accordance with our highest nature, to grow in wisdom, virtue, and purpose. If being with someone requires you to stay small, hide your ambitions, or abandon your goals just to keep them comfortable, you are effectively suffocating your own potential. Sometimes the people in our lives become threatened by our progress. They might subtly discourage your new habits, criticize your ambitions, or make you feel guilty for the time you spend improving yourself. They prefer the old you because that version was easier to control or more predictable. But as the Stoic philosopher Seneca once suggested, we should associate only with those who are likely to make us better. This is the concept of prohieresis, our moral choice and the integrity of our will. If a relationship forces you to choose between your growth and their comfort, it is no longer a bond, it is a cage. To evaluate this in your own life and protect your progress, you can apply the growth alignment framework. The future self-reflection. Spend a few moments visualizing the best version of yourself 5 years from now, your skills, your mindset, and your achievements. Then, honestly ask, is your current relationship a bridge to that person or a wall blocking the way? The ambition test. Share a new goal or a dream with your partner and observe their immediate reaction. A supportive partner will ask how they can help, while an anchor will often respond with doubt, sarcasm, or a reminder of your past failures. The comfort zone audit. Notice if you are intentionally holding yourself back or playing it safe to avoid upsetting the balance of the relationship. If you are shrinking to fit into the space they've created, you are betraying your own nature. The empowerment protocol. Start dedicating time to your growth without asking for permission. Notice if this creates tension. A healthy relationship should be a platform for growth, not a source of guilt for becoming a better version of yourself. The rational assessment. Remind yourself that every day you spend staying small for someone else is a day you are losing from your own life. Radical freedom begins when you realize that your growth is not negotiable. Remember, a healthy relationship should be a platform for growth, not a cage. If the cost of keeping the peace is the death of your progress, the price is far too high. You owe it to yourself to be around people who want to see you fly, not those who want to clip your wings. 2. Prevalence of negative emotions. We often hear that relationships are hard work, and while that contains a grain of truth, there is a profound difference between the hard work of building something beautiful and the soul-crushing exhaustion of surviving a battlefield. A relationship at its core should be a sanctuary, a place where you return to find peace, support, and clarity after facing the inevitable chaos of the outside world. If you find that your days are consistently filled with drama, jealousy, or bitter arguments, more often than they are filled with tranquility, you need to pay attention. When the emotional climate of your connection is defined by tension rather than trust, the cost of staying begins to outweigh any perceived benefit. Stoicism reminds us that while we cannot control the actions or moods of others, we have a sacred duty to protect our own inner peace, or ataraxia. Imagine living in a house where the roof is constantly leaking. You spend all your energy mopping up the water instead of actually living your life. This is what happens when negative emotions dominate a relationship. You become so focused on managing the next conflict or surviving the next outburst that you have no energy left for your own happiness or purpose. You aren't just experiencing a rough patch, you are participating in the slow depletion of your own vitality. If you feel psychologically bankrupt at the end of every conversation, it is a clear signal that the connection is draining your soul rather than replenishing it. To address this emotional imbalance and reclaim your sanctuary, you can implement the Emotional Vitality Audit, the Ratio Tracker. For 1 week, honestly note the emotional quality of your interactions. Ask yourself, how many moments felt supportive or peaceful versus how many felt draining, hostile, or tense? If the scale is permanently tilted toward negativity, the environment is toxic. The source identification. Determine if the negativity is tied to a specific solvable problem or if it is a fundamental pattern of the other person's character. Stoicism teaches us to accept what we cannot change, and often you cannot change someone else's preference for chaos. The peace threshold. Explicitly decide how much of your mental tranquility you are willing to sacrifice. Set a mental limit on how long you will engage in a circular negative argument before calmly removing yourself from the room. The safe harbor reflection. When you're away from this person, do you feel a sense of relief? If the world outside feels more peaceful than the person who is supposed to be your partner, your priorities have become dangerously inverted. The energy redirection. Consciously take the energy you usually spend on mopping up emotional leaks and pour it back into your own self-care. Notice how your spirit responds when it is no longer under constant siege. Peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but the presence of respect and emotional safety. If your sanctuary has turned into a battlefield, it may be time to walk away and find the peace you deserve. You were not born to spend your life in a state of emotional survival. You were born to flourish in a state of grace. 3. Manipulation and control. One of the most dangerous signals in any relationship is the subtle shift from partnership to ownership. In a healthy connection, both individuals retain their agency, the power to make their own choices, hold their own opinions, and move freely through the world. However, when manipulation and control enter the frame, this agency begins to die. You may start to feel like a pawn in someone else's game, where your choices are no longer your own, but are dictated by their whims, their insecurities, or their calculated guilt trips. Manipulation often wears a mask of care. It might sound like, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't go out tonight." But beneath these words lies a desire to dominate and diminish your spirit. From a Stoic perspective, this is a violation of the most fundamental human right, the freedom of the will. Stoicism teaches us that our prohairesis, our capacity to choose and reason, is the only thing that is truly ours. When you allow someone else to control your decisions through emotional blackmail or coercion, you are essentially surrendering your status as a free individual. Think of it like a bird in a gilded cage. The cage might be beautiful, and the person holding the key might claim they are keeping you safe, but you have lost your ability to fly. Control isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silent treatment used as a weapon, or the subtle undermining of your confidence so that you feel you can't survive without them. To reclaim your power and protect your individual sovereignty, you must implement the autonomy restoration framework, the guilt analysis. The next time you make a decision based on fear of their reaction or a sense of unearned guilt, stop. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I truly want to, or because I am being managed by someone else's expectations? The boundary testing protocol. Try setting a small, reasonable boundary regarding your time or your space. Observe the reaction. A person who respects you will acknowledge it. A person who wants to control you will escalate their manipulation to break it. The whim evaluation. Notice if your schedule, your friendships, or even your thoughts are being adjusted to satisfy their unpredictable moods. If you are constantly walking on eggshells to avoid a conflict, you are being controlled by their emotional instability. The isolation audit. Pay close attention to whether this person is trying to distance you from supportive friends or family. Isolation is the primary tool of control, designed to make you more dependent on their approval and their reality. The value reassertion. Reconnect with the things you loved before this person entered your life. Reclaiming your hobbies and independent interests is a powerful act of Stoic defiance against those who wish to own your time. You were not born to be an instrument for someone else's ego or a tool for their convenience. A relationship should be a meeting of two free souls, not the subjugation of one by the other. If the price of your connection is the surrender of your freedom, then the connection is no longer a bond, it's a shackle. Reclaiming your agency is the first step toward radical freedom. 4. More harm than good. Stoicism invites us to be ruthless auditors of our own lives. It teaches us to weigh every interaction and every habit by its utility to the soul. In the simplest terms, is this adding to my life, or is it consistently taking away? We often get trapped in the sunk cost fallacy, where we stay in a relationship simply because we've already invested so much time and effort into it. But a relationship that consistently drains your vitality and leaves you psychologically bankrupt is not an investment. It is a form of self-destruction. If you find that the maintenance of the relationship requires more energy than the joy it brings, you are operating at a loss, and you are sacrificing your future for the sake of a failing past. Imagine a vessel with a hole in the bottom. No matter how much water you pour in, it will never be full. Some people are like that hole. They consume your empathy, your time, and your mental health, yet they offer nothing in return to help you refill your cup. You become a shell of yourself, exhausted and depleted, yet you feel a strange obligation to keep pouring. Stoicism reminds us that our primary responsibility is to maintain the integrity of our own character and well-being, because if we are destroyed, we can be of no use to ourselves or the world. When the damage being done to your spirit outweighs the comfort of companionship, you have reached a tipping point that requires radical honesty. To address this imbalance and protect your vital energy, consider this comprehensive vitality assessment. the energy audit. For the next few days, pay close attention to your state of mind immediately after interacting with this person. Do you feel inspired and calm, or do you feel a heavy fog of exhaustion and a desperate need to be alone just to recover? Your body often knows the truth long before your mind is willing to admit it. The utility test. Ask yourself the hard question: if I met this person for the first time today, knowing everything I know now, would I still choose to invite them into my life? If the answer is a clear no, then you are staying out of habit or fear, not because the relationship is inherently good for you. The resource allocation strategy. Start consciously redirecting the energy you usually spend on fixing the relationship or managing the other person's emotions back toward your own health and goals. Notice the resistance you feel and use it as evidence of how much energy you've been losing. The empty chair visualization. Imagine your life without this constant drain. Visualize a day where you don't have to defend your peace or explain your worth. Does that vision feel lonely, or does it feel like a massive weight has been lifted from your chest? The cost-benefit analysis. List the virtues you have gained from this relationship versus the peace you have lost. If the list of losses is longer, you are participating in your own depletion. Recognizing that a relationship is doing more harm than good isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of justice toward yourself. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you certainly cannot find radical freedom while you are participating in your own ruin. If the connection costs you your peace, it is too expensive. 5. Lack of mutual respect. Without respect, a relationship is nothing more than a hollow shell, a structure waiting to collapse under the slightest pressure. Respect is the invisible foundation upon which all healthy human interactions are built. It is the recognition of the other person's dignity, their boundaries, and their right to exist as an independent soul. If you find that your boundaries are treated as mere suggestions, or worse, as obstacles to be overcome, and your dignity is constantly being stepped on, you are no longer in a partnership. You are in a state of subjugation. Stoicism teaches us that while we cannot force others to respect us, we have an absolute obligation to respect ourselves. This erosion of respect often starts small: a dismissive comment, a sarcastic remark about your interests, or a minor boundary being ignored. But if left unchecked, these small cracks become deep fractures. You begin to feel small, undervalued, and eventually invisible. When someone repeatedly crosses your lines, they are testing how much of your soul you are willing to surrender to keep them near. A relationship without mutual respect isn't just unpleasant. It is a direct assault on your character and your prohairesis. If you allow yourself to be treated as less than an equal, you are essentially telling the world that your peace and your values do not matter. To address this and re-establish your personal dignity, you must implement the Dignity Restoration Framework. The Boundary Audit. Clearly define 3 non-negotiable boundaries for yourself. These aren't requests or suggestions, they are the terms of your engagement. Observe what happens when you state them calmly. A person who respects you will acknowledge them, while a person who seeks to dominate will mock or push back. The respect reflection. Ask yourself, do I admire the person I am when I am with them? If you feel ashamed, diminished, or find yourself acting like a servant to their ego, it is a sign that the lack of respect is starting to infect your own self-view. The Zero Tolerance Protocol. Identify one specific behavior that you will no longer accept, whether it's being yelled at, lied to, or dismissed. The next time it happens, instead of arguing, remove yourself from the situation immediately. Stoicism is about action and maintaining your own standards, not begging others to change theirs. The Value Alignment Check. Respect is often tied to shared values. If they don't value what you value, integrity, kindness, or growth, they will never truly respect your path. Determine if this gap is a fundamental mismatch of character that cannot be bridged. The mirror exercise. Look at how you treat them. If you find that you have also lost respect for them because of their behavior, the relationship has already lost its core. You cannot have a healthy bond with someone you do not look up to. True freedom begins with the realization that you don't need anyone's permission to be treated with dignity. If a relationship requires you to sacrifice your self-respect to maintain it, then it is a price no free individual should ever be willing to pay. Respect is not a favor to be granted. It is the minimum requirement for your presence. 6. Holding on to illusions. We often find ourselves in love with a ghost. We cling to the memory of who a person used to be in the beginning, or we become obsessed with the potential of who they could become if they only changed a few things. But Stoicism calls us back to the present moment, to the hic et nunc. It demands that we look at the reality of the person standing in front of us right now, not the fantasy we've constructed in our minds. If you are ignoring their current behavior, their repeated patterns, and their lack of effort in order to preserve a mental illusion, you are no longer living in reality. You are living a lie, and in doing so, you are betraying your own reason. This is perhaps the most difficult form of attachment to break because it feels like hope. You tell yourself, "But they have a good heart," or "They were so kind to me years ago." While that may be true, the Stoic path reminds us that we must deal with things as they are, not as we wish them to be. When you love an illusion, you are essentially refusing to accept the truth of your own life. You become a prisoner of a past that no longer exists, or a future that may never arrive. By holding on to the ghost of a person, you are preventing yourself from finding a connection that is real, tangible, and healthy. To break free from these mental shadows and return to reality, you can utilize the reality alignment strategy, the evidence log. For 1 week, write down only the facts of your interactions, not your interpretations, not their excuses, and not your hopes, just the facts. Seeing the cold evidence on paper makes it much harder for the illusion to survive your own logic. The potentiality audit. Ask yourself, am I in love with this person's actions today, or am I in love with my own imagination of them? If your happiness depends on them becoming someone else, you are not in a relationship with them. You are in a relationship with a project. The friend. Perspective. Imagine your best friend was being treated exactly the way you are being treated right now. What advice would you give them? Often we are far more honest with others than we are with ourselves, and this shift in perspective can shatter the illusion. The sunk cost release. Acknowledge the time you've invested, but realize that time spent is not a reason to time waste. Just because you've spent years on an illusion doesn't mean you should sacrifice another day to it. The radical acceptance meditation. Sit in silence and repeat the phrase, "This is who they are right now." Allow yourself to feel the grief of that realization. Acceptance is the only bridge that leads from the world of illusions back to the world of freedom. True peace cannot be built on a foundation of fantasies. When you finally stop trying to fix the ghost and start accepting the reality, you regain your power. It is only by letting go of the person they could be that you create space for the life you were actually meant to live. 7. Compromising your values. Your character is the only thing you truly possess in this world. Everything else, your wealth, your reputation, and even your relationships, can be taken away from you at any moment. But your integrity, your moral compass, and your values belong solely to you. A relationship becomes a slow-acting poison when it begins to demand that you betray this inner core. If you find yourself lying, cheating, or compromising your sense of right and wrong just to sustain a connection or please your partner, you are rotting your integrity from the inside out. You are sacrificing the permanent for the sake of the temporary, and in the Stoic view, this is the greatest tragedy a human can endure. Stoicism teaches us that living in harmony with our values is the only path to a flourishing life. When a relationship forces you to choose between your partner and your conscience, it is no longer a source of support. It is a threat to your existence as a virtuous being. You might think, it's just a small compromise, or I'm doing this to keep the peace. But every time you silence your inner voice to accommodate someone else's lack of integrity, you lose a piece of yourself. Eventually, you look in the mirror and realize that while you've kept the relationship alive, you've allowed your soul to die. You cannot be at peace with another if you are at war with yourself. To protect your integrity and realign with your true north, you can apply the Value Integrity Protocol. The Core Value Inventory. Identify your top 5 non-negotiable values, things like honesty, kindness, or ambition. Now, honestly evaluate how many times in the last month this relationship has forced you to act against them. A pattern of betrayal is a signal that cannot be ignored. The price of admission. Test. Ask yourself, what is the price of admission for this relationship? If the price is your honesty, your self-respect, or your moral clarity, then the price is far too high. No human connection is worth becoming someone you despise. The Stoic silence exercise. When you are pressured to compromise, practice the power of a calm and firm no. Observe the reaction. A person who loves you will respect your principles. A person who only wants to use you will be angered by your refusal to bend. The moral legacy reflection. Imagine you are at the end of your life looking back. Will you be proud of the person you became within this relationship, or will you regret the parts of yourself you gave away just to keep someone else near? The truth-telling mirror. Start being radically honest with yourself and your partner about your values. Stop hiding your beliefs to avoid conflict. Truth is a great filter. It will either strengthen the bond or accelerate the departure of those who do not belong in your life. Radical freedom is found when your actions and your values are in perfect alignment. If a relationship requires you to break that alignment, it is an obstacle to your freedom, not a path to it. Protecting your character isn't being selfish, it's being responsible for the only thing that truly matters. 8. Lack of reciprocity. Relationships are meant to be a shared burden, a collaborative effort where two people combine their strengths to navigate the challenges of life. However, when the scale becomes permanently tilted, the relationship transforms into a parasitic connection rather than a partnership. If you find that you are the only one carrying the emotional weight, the one providing the empathy, initiating the communication, and making all the sacrifices, while the other person simply consumes your energy, you are in a state of exhaustion. Stoicism teaches us that while we should give freely, we must also be wise about where we plant our seeds. Planting a garden in a desert that refuses to bloom is not an act of virtue, it is an act of folly. A lack of reciprocity often hides behind the excuse of personality or busyness. You might tell yourself that they just show love differently, or that they'll step up when things get really tough. But a relationship is sustained by the daily mutual exchange of care and effort. When you are the only one investing, you aren't just tired, you are being devalued. You are essentially teaching the other person that your needs, your time, and your efforts are worth less than theirs. In the Stoic view, friendship and love should be a sympathia, a mutual feeling, and a shared movement. Without this balance, you are not building a life together. You are simply being used to facilitate theirs. To restore balance or gain the clarity needed to walk away, consider the reciprocity rebalancing framework, the effort audit. For a period of time, stop over-functioning. Stop being the first to text, the first to apologize, or the first to solve every problem. Observe what happens in the space you've created. Does the other person step into that space to meet you, or does the connection simply wither away? The needs communication test. Clearly and calmly express a specific need you have. A partner who values reciprocity will listen and adjust. A person who is comfortable with the imbalance will often become defensive or dismissive, labeling your needs as demands. The investment analysis. Ask yourself, if I stopped giving right now, what would be left of this relationship? If the answer is nothing, then you are the only thing holding it together, and that is an unsustainable way to live. The fair exchange reflection. Think about your most supportive friendships. Notice the natural back and forth, the way you both give and receive without keeping score. Now compare that to this relationship. The contrast will often show you exactly what is missing. The self-care redirection. Take the energy you've been using to carry the other person and reinvest it in your own goals and well-being. Notice if you feel more at peace when you focus on yourself than when you are chasing their approval. True freedom is found when you surround yourself with people who value your contribution as much as you value theirs. You are not a bottomless well for others to drink from. You are a human being who deserves the same level of care and effort that you so generously provide. If the bridge between you only has traffic moving in one direction, it's not a connection, it's an exit. 9. Abuse in any form. In our journey through life, we must establish certain lines that can never be crossed. Non-negotiable boundaries that protect our very existence. Abuse, whether it is physical, emotional, or verbal, is the most violent signal that a relationship has become toxic to your soul. There is a common misconception that enduring such treatment is a form of stoic strength or patience. But this is a dangerous misunderstanding. Stoicism is about the preservation of dignity and the exercise of reason. Abuse is the absolute antithesis of both. It is not a challenge for you to overcome or a test of your loyalty. It is a clear indication that the environment you're in is destructive to your human nature. Abuse often begins subtly. It might start as jokes that belittle your intelligence, or emotional outbursts that leave you walking on eggshells. But whether it's the physical threat, the constant yelling, or the psychological gaslighting that makes you doubt your own reality, the result is the same: the systematic destruction of your self-worth. From a Stoic perspective, any person who seeks to diminish your agency or harm your personhood is an obstacle to your ataraxia, your mental tranquility. Staying in such a situation isn't an act of love. It is an act of participation in your own ruin. You cannot find radical freedom in a place where you are not safe, and you cannot flourish in a place where you are being dismantled. To reclaim your safety and your life, you must move beyond excuses and follow a safety and sanity protocol, the radical truth. Acknowledgement. Stop using softened language to describe the harm. Call it what it is. It's not "they have a temper" or "they're just stressed." It is abuse. Identifying the reality with precise, clinical language is the first step toward breaking the spell of denial. The objective observer. Test. Imagine you were watching a movie of your own life. When the scene of the abuse comes on, would you stay in the theater and cheer for the relationship, or would you want the protagonist to run? We often accept for ourselves what we would never tolerate for a stranger. The distance strategy. Recognize that you cannot reason with an abuser. Abuse is a choice they make to exert power. The only Stoic response to a threat to your fundamental dignity is to remove yourself from the sphere of that threat. Peace cannot be negotiated with someone who uses fear as a tool. The support system. Activation. Stoicism doesn't mean suffering in silence. Reach out to trusted friends, family, or professionals. Radical freedom often requires the courage to ask for help when your own strength has been systematically undermined by the cycle of abuse. The future safety visualization. Spend a few moments every day imagining a life where you don't feel afraid, where you don't have to explain away bruises, emotional or physical. That sense of relief you feel in the visualization is your soul telling you what it needs to survive. You are a sacred being with an inherent right to safety and respect. No amount of history, no shared memories, and no promises of change can justify the sacrifice of your physical or mental well-being. Leaving an abusive situation is not a failure. It is the ultimate act of stoic courage, the choice to protect the only thing that is truly yours, your life and your peace. 10. Communication. Failure. Communication is the lifeblood of any relationship. It is the bridge that allows two separate worlds to meet, understand each other, and resolve the inevitable frictions of life. But when this bridge collapses, when words become weapons, or, even worse, empty echoes, there is no longer a path forward. You may find yourself trapped in circular arguments that never reach a resolution, or met with a wall of silence that leaves you feeling more alone than if you were actually by yourself. In the Stoic view, reason and dialogue are what distinguish human connection from mere animal proximity. When reason is abandoned and replaced by defensiveness or withdrawal, the relationship reaches a dead end. There are two primary forms of communication failure: the storm and the silence. The storm is when every attempt to discuss a problem turns into a battle of egos, where the goal is no longer to understand, but to win or to hurt. The silence, often more damaging, is when one partner uses stonewalling or emotional withdrawal as a way to avoid accountability or to punish the other. Both patterns are toxic because they prevent growth. Stoicism teaches us that we should use speech to seek truth and harmony. If your words are consistently twisted, ignored, or used against you, then communication has ceased to be a tool for connection and has become a tool for manipulation. To evaluate the state of your dialogue and seek a way out of the noise, you can utilize the dialectical clarity framework, the resolution audit. Look back at the last 3 major disagreements you had. Were they actually resolved? Did the behavior change? If the same issues keep appearing like ghosts, you aren't communicating, you're just rehearsing a tragedy. The Steel-Manning test. In your next discussion, try to repeat your partner's point of view back to them so accurately that they say, "Yes, that's exactly how I feel." If they refuse to do the same for you, or if they use your vulnerability as a target, you are speaking to someone who isn't interested in a partnership. The silence observation. Pay attention to how the space between you feels. Is it a comfortable silence of two people at peace, or is it a heavy, cold silence used as a weapon? Recognizing punitive silence is crucial for understanding the health of the bond. The I statement barrier. Try communicating using only your feelings and needs. For example, "I feel lonely when," instead of accusations. If even this non-threatening approach is met with defensiveness or mockery, the failure of communication is a choice they are making, not a lack of skill. The exit, the loop. Strategy. Recognize when an argument has become circular. Instead of continuing to scream into the void, calmly state, "We aren't solving this, and I am choosing to protect my peace by ending this conversation now." This is an act of stoic agency. A relationship without communication is like a ship without a rudder. You may still be moving, but you have no control over where you are going. If you find that you are constantly shouting but never being heard, it might be time to realize that some silences are a sign that the conversation and the relationship is over. 11. Loss of inner peace. The ancient Stoics, particularly Epictetus, argued that the ultimate goal of a well-lived life is ataraxia, a state of imperturbability or mental tranquility. It is the ability to remain calm and centered, regardless of the chaos in the external world. However, when a relationship becomes the primary source of that chaos, you are facing a fundamental crisis. If your connection with another person feels like a constant storm that makes mental peace impossible, you are sacrificing your most valuable asset for something that may not even deserve it. You cannot build a life of purpose when your mind is perpetually occupied by the anxiety, stress, and instability of your relationship. Inner peace isn't just a feeling, it is a compass. When it's gone, you lose your ability to make good decisions, to be productive, and to be kind to yourself. We often tell ourselves that the stress is temporary or that things will calm down once life gets easier. But if the turbulence is a constant feature of the relationship itself, you aren't just in a rough patch, you are in a toxic environment. Stoicism teaches us that we should guard our minds as carefully as we guard our homes. If you wouldn't allow someone to walk into your house and throw trash on the floor, why do you allow them to walk into your mind and throw your peace into disarray? To reclaim your mental sanctuary and assess the cost of your connection, consider the Tranquility Restoration Protocol, the baseline peace test. Spend 30 minutes alone in complete silence. Notice how long it takes for your mind to drift toward the conflicts or anxieties of your relationship. If you cannot find peace even in solitude because the noise of the other person is so loud in your head, the connection has become an invasive force. The stress mapping exercise. For 1 week, track your physical symptoms of stress, tightness in the chest, headaches, or lack of sleep. Map these symptoms to your interactions with your partner. Often, our bodies are shouting the truth that our minds are trying to ignore, that this relationship is a threat to your health. The safe harbor reflection. Ask yourself, is my home a place where I go to escape the world, or is it the place I need to escape from? If the world outside feels more peaceful than your partnership, your priorities have become dangerously inverted. The Stoic breath technique. When the relationship starts to trigger a storm of anxiety, practice pausing. In that pause, ask, is this person or this argument worth the price of my soul's peace? Remind yourself that you have the power to withdraw your emotional investment at any moment. The sovereignty visualization. Imagine yourself 6 months from now, living in a state of absolute calm. You are making your own choices, your home is quiet, and your mind is clear. Does that version of you feel lonely, or does it feel powerful? Radical freedom is impossible without a quiet mind. If you are constantly sacrificing your sanity to maintain a connection, you are paying with a currency you can never get back. Protecting your ataraxia isn't a luxury. It is the highest form of self-respect. Sometimes, the only way to find peace is to walk away from the person who is making it impossible to find. 12. The erosion of self-identity. The most tragic consequence of a toxic or mismatched relationship is not the time lost or the tears shed. It is the slow, systematic disappearance of who you are. You might look in the mirror one day and realize you no longer recognize the person staring back at you. Your hobbies have withered, your opinions have been silenced, and your once vibrant personality has been replaced by a cautious, diminished version of yourself, one that exists solely to navigate the complexities of another person's needs. Stoicism teaches us that our self is our most sacred territory. When you allow that territory to be colonized by the expectations, moods, and demands of someone else, you are committing a form of spiritual suicide. In Stoic philosophy, the concept of hegemonikon refers to the ruling faculty of the mind, the part of us that reasons, decides, and defines our identity. A healthy relationship should be a union of two whole individuals, not the absorption of one into the other. If you find that you have become a mere shadow of your partner, or if you have lost the ability to stand firm in your own truth, you have lost your hegemonicon. You are no longer living your life. You are merely reacting to theirs. This erosion often happens so slowly that you don't notice it until you feel hollow. But remember, you are not an extension of someone else. You are a sovereign being with your own destiny to fulfill. To reclaim your identity and stand once again as a whole individual, implement the self-sovereignty reclamation, the original self. Inventory. Make a list of 5 things you loved doing, thinking, or believing before this relationship began. Now, look at how many of those things still have a place in your life. If the list is empty, it's time to start reclaiming those fragments of your soul. The independent action test. Consciously spend a day making choices entirely for yourself. What to eat, where to walk, what to read, without checking in or seeking approval. Notice if you feel a sense of guilt or fear. That tension is the sound of your identity fighting to break free from its chains. The voice. Reflection. Pay attention to how often you use the word we instead of I. While partnership is important, a total loss of the I suggests that your boundaries have been completely erased. Practice reasserting your individual perspective in small, daily conversations. The value anchor strategy. Reconnect with one core belief or value that you've suppressed to keep the peace. Speak that truth out loud. Radical freedom begins with the courage to be seen as you truly are, even if it creates friction with those who prefer you small. The whole person visualization. Imagine yourself standing alone, strong and complete. You are not leaning on anyone, and no one is weighing you down. Visualize the colors of your personality returning. This vision isn't about being alone. It's about being all there. Your identity is the foundation upon which your entire life is built. If that foundation is being eroded, the entire structure of your future is at risk. A relationship should complement your life, not consume it. Reclaiming yourself isn't an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate act of Stoic justice. You were born to be a light, not a shadow. Ending a relationship is never an easy task. It is perhaps the most difficult exercise in Stoic courage you will ever face. We are wired for connection, and the fear of the unknown can often feel more paralyzing than the pain of a familiar struggle. But remember this, your life is a brief flash in the vastness of time, a tiny moment in the history of the cosmos. You